Hello and welcome to the Evercade Retreat. Gene Joke here, and today I'm speculating about the possibility of a Data East Collection 2, as in a red console cart, as we already have a Data East Arcade 2. Now Data East are primarily, or were primarily, an arcade developer, but they did have some console exclusive games. And there are a few that aren't yet on the Evercade. There's also ports of their arcade games, some of which aren't on Evercade yet either. Of course, with Data East, as I'm sure you may know, the licenses of the games are divided up between two companies. There might even be a third for all I know, but that's why Windjammers, Karnov and Friends was called that, not Data East Arcade 3. So some games would be more complicated, and I'm going to treat this as a Gmode collection, as in using the Data East name. Gmode are the company that licensed the carts that do use the name, so anything I know isn't owned by them is off the cards. So no Mega Drive ports of Chelnov or Vapor Trail, and no NES port of Karnov. So here I'm effectively pitching a cart. It is a bit of a mixed bag in terms of quality and games that are arcade ports and console exclusives. And some I'm not sure of the rights of, so they might not even be on the cards anyway. Anyway, that's enough waffle, so let's get started. B-Wings for the Nintendo Entertainment System. This is a port of the arcade game which is already on Data East Arcade 2. However, I do hear that the NES port is superior and adds some features. I've only played this briefly and it seems okay. It does seem a bit better in some ways, and I think is significantly different enough to warrant it being on the cart. Although it's not an amazing game, at least not based on what I've played, and sometimes it's hard to judge on first impressions, but it does have its fans, and every cart has some games that maybe aren't great, but they add a little bit of curiosity or intrigue. They offer something, even if it isn't a great game in its own right. And yeah, it might well be filler content. Next up is Cobra Command, the NES port of the game. I'm not sure of the ownership of this one, so it might not be viable, and it's not the sort of laser disc style game. This is a side-scrolling helicopter, almost chopliftery style game. Again, it's not an amazing game, but I think it'd be quite intriguing, a bit of a curiosity, and yes, it would be more filler content. I know we're not off to the best start here, but it does get better. But not with this next game, which is Captain Silver. Again, I've never played the arcade original, and there are a couple of options here. It was released for the Sega Master System, which I understand is a more arcade accurate port. And there is an NES port which makes enemies a bit more tanky and makes some changes. I mean, you can see from what's on screen, they are quite different visually, although the core layout of the game does seem to be the same. But I say NES port, it was a Famicom port, so I don't think it was released outside of Japan. I could be wrong there. Not a great game, definitely would be more filler content based on my first impressions, but yeah, curio, filler, whatever. Now, staying with games that aren't necessarily that good, we have Werewolf the Last Warrior for the NES. This game has a bit of a mixed reputation. I've definitely heard some negative things about it, and what I've played initially seems like there's some interesting ideas and some Data East weirdness, but didn't really seem all that much fun. But maybe it gets better later on, or maybe it is just a not very good game. You play a werewolf in a sci-fi type setting. Weird enough, yeah. Interesting, not particularly good from what I can tell. Next we're going to something a bit more known and I think a bit more fun, and that is the NES port of Heavy Barrel. Now, as I understand it, the arcade of Heavy Barrel was going to be on one of the Data East arcade collections, but for whatever reason didn't make the cut. And while I expect most people would probably rather have the arcade original, this might be an interesting inclusion. It's a fairly standard commando style game. It's quite fun, and to be perfectly honest, I haven't played much of the arcade original, so I can't really recall how they compare. Obviously it's a visual downgrade and it's a little bit rough around the edges, but it's not a bad little game. Okay, next we're going to a console exclusive, and well, it's two games really, or maybe even three, and that is Metal Max, or Metal Max and Metal Max 2, or Metal Max Return to Metal Max 2. Essentially, Metal Max was released in Japan on the NES and has been translated by fans, but I don't think has ever had an official Western release. Metal Max Returns was a Super Nintendo port of it, which came out after Metal Max 2. The footage you're seeing is from Metal Max Returns, and it's the only one of these I've played, and I've no idea of the right situation because it wasn't developed by Data East directly. That said, there is a lack of RPGs on the Evercade, and what I played of it, which is only a very small amount, it seemed absolutely fine. Really not enough to judge, but the graphics and music were decent enough. It seemed fairly easy to pick up and get started with, so I think it would please RPG fans for sure. Again, if it's possible, and having a couple of options, it could greatly enhance the Evercade's library of RPGs. Next, I'm going to cover a couple of Game Boy games, one of which is Nail and Scale, which is a side-scrolling platform puzzle game. I don't know much about it, it seemed okay what I played briefly. Again, could be a decent enough for inclusion. And staying with the Game Boy, Burger Time Deluxe, which I have heard is one of the better Burger Time games. And from what a little I played of it, yeah, that seems like it could well be the case, so I think it'd be a welcome inclusion of quite a known brand. Next up, staying with something familiar, Joe and Mac, the original game. Obviously there is the arcade original, which perhaps might come to a future Data East arcade collection, but there are also ports for the NES and the Super Nintendo. I think it's safe to say most people would probably prefer to have the Super Nintendo ports, but either way, it's a solid game and there's a couple of options there. And for more Joe and Mac action, or Joe and Mac related action, there's Congo's Caper for the Super Nintendo, another bright colourful platformer where you control a caveman type character, only this time he's part monkey. I've only played a bit of this game, and while I wouldn't say it seems amazing, it seems pretty solid, and that would be a fun inclusion which I have seen a number of people ask for on various social medias. Another possible game would be Fighter's History Misaguchi Kiki Ipatsu. I probably butchered that, but it's the third Fighter's History game, and I don't know much about it. It's on the Super Nintendo, and I assume there's an arcade version as well, but I've never played it. The only Fighter's History game I have played is the original that's already on the Evercade, and that was on the Super Nintendo as well as arcade. And up until the Neo Geo fighters came to Evercade, it was the best fighting game on the system. I really don't know if this is any good, how it compares to the first game, or how it compares to other fighting games that are now on the Evercade, such as Go Mark of the Wolves or King of the Fighters, but it would add variety to the cart at least. But it does feature Chelnov as the final boss, so maybe that could be a rights issue, who knows. Okay, next I'm going to cover a couple of Mega Drive games, the first of which is Dashing Desperados, which is a racing platform type game where you race your opponent to get to the end and get the girl or something. I honestly haven't heard that much favourable about it, but it does have nice graphics. Again, I'd say this would probably be a bit of a filler game, but it might be a possibility. On the more favourable side of things, next up is High Seas Havoc, a Sonic the Hedgehog clone where you control a seal pirate or something. It looks nice and it plays pretty well too. I've played a little bit of it previously, and it's a game that I'd quite happily see on the Evercade. I don't think we're going to get a Sonic game anytime soon, so yeah, sure, why not? Although it would be making the collection a bit platformer heavy, that's not necessarily a bad thing. At least it's different enough from Joe and Mac that I think it would be worth including as well. And lastly, for the Mega Drive games, we have Minnesota Fats Pool Hustler, or Pool Legend, something like that. It's Side Pocket 2. I think Minnesota Fats a licensable thing, or would need a license, so maybe they have to change the name. It's more Side Pockets, that's not necessarily a bad thing, and it does add a bit more variety to the collection as well. There is also a Side Pocket 3, which was released for the PlayStation, I assume, and in arcades as well, and it takes the series into 3D. I haven't played this game, so I don't know how it compares. I think both on one cart would be a bit redundant, so yeah, I'll come back to that later. Also staying with the PlayStation, there's Magical Drop 3. Now, as I understand it, there's a few versions of this released, and of course I think it's on the arcade, which I think it used Neo Geo hardware. So again, a possible contender, and I think it would be quite a welcome addition. I know the series has a lot of fans, I quite enjoyed them myself, although I have never played Magical Drop 3 or any of its variations. Another game which may be possible is Outlaws of the Lost Dynasty, a 2D fighting game set against a backdrop of Chinese history. I think the title gives that away. I haven't been able to play this one, and I don't know if it's any good, but hey, maybe. Actually, another Mega Drive game I forgot about is the Mega Drive port of Super Real Darwin, which I think went by the name of Darwin 4081. As we have Super Real Darwin on the Evercade already, I don't know if it would be worthwhile or if this version is particularly different. It did feel a bit different when I was playing playing it, but yeah, I haven't played enough to know for sure. Anyway, that's all the games I think are potentially viable. There are other Data East made or published console games, but some of them are untranslated from Japanese and sound like they would be text heavy, or for consoles which the Evercade can't emulate. Even so, assuming all or most of those games are available to be licensed, then there could well be a worthwhile collection there. As long as there's enough quality and recognisable games there to offset the fact that some of them really are filler quality, I think it could be worthwhile. And again, if there isn't, perhaps some of these games could appear on a Data East arcade collection. Perhaps Blaze could go the similar route they did with the Rare Collection 1 by mixing console and arcade games on one collection. Perhaps doing it that way they might even be able to get two collections out of it, as I'm pretty sure there are a reasonable number of Data East arcade games yet to hit an Evercade cartridge, such as Spin Master, which can be found on the Data East Super Pocket, Heavy Barrel that I mentioned earlier, and several others. I'm not going to go into them, one because who owns the license, two, I think this video's gone on long enough. And having said that, I guess it's pretty much time to wrap things up. So yeah, I do think a Data East Collection 2, or a console Collection 2 is potentially viable and could be worth doing, although as none of the games are particularly huge and the simple fact that it hasn't happened yet, I don't know if it ever will. Share your thoughts in the comments below, but for me that's a wrap, so thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next video.